before your comments, I know you have some questions about what Daniel Cameron was saying today.
Yeah, well, first of all, the reason he doesn't want to release the report is because it will show the fact that everything he said basically is not true, right? He says the ballistics show that whether or not Hagison's rounds hit Breonna Taylor is inconclusive. That's the same thing the ballistics report says about Kenneth Walker's shot on Officer Mattingly. I've seen the report. I've got it. And it says it's inconclusive. And it doesn't say it's a 9mm and the officers were carrying 40 calibers. It specifically does not say that. It says the round is consistent with a 9mm. However, it cannot be determined that it was conclusively fired. It is also consistent with a 40 caliber round because there's only a remainder of lead remaining. All right, a small amount. It cannot be determined that it was fired from Kenny Walker's gun, and the trajectory of the wound that Mattingly has is not consistent with it being fired by Kenny Walker standing up at 20 feet away. It's an upward angle on his thigh of about 45 degrees, which is completely inconsistent with the story they get. But you notice they don't want to talk about any of those things. And the other thing he says is, they announced, the police announced that was corroborated by a witness. There were 2 911 calls made from that apartment that night. Both of the calls said, they're shooting guns, get the police here. Not one person said, the cops are here shooting guns, they've already announced the search warrant. Both of the people say, get the police here. 11 other witnesses testified, gave statements. They never heard them announce. And the corroborating witness that they rely on, and it really is, it belies the true whitewash of the whole thing. When he says, well, Mattingly said they announced and Cosgrove said they announced. You mean the 2 guys that are under investigation for murder said they announced? Well, let's rely on them. But they said that testimony was corroborated by a witness. That's a witness named Aaron Sarpy. He was interviewed by Jason Vance shortly after this happened, and on page 2, line 1 of his interview, he was asked, did you ever hear them announce police? And he said, no, nobody identified themselves. Now, Mr. Sarpy is there's a language barrier there. LMPD proceeded to interview him 3 separate times subsequent to that until they could get him to say that he heard them announce. His first interview, he says they did not, but they interviewed him 3 times over the course of about 2 months until they can get him to say that, and that's what they rely on. Did they talk about the fact that these officers are saying that they were firing at him inside the apartment with an AR-15? Because that's what they say in their interviews. That's what they're saying on the radio. They're barricaded inside with an AR-15. We know for a fact that's a lie. The officers testified that Kenny Walker fired 12 to 15 shots. That's what their statements were. We know that's a lie. We know that and we also know that there were officers on scene who carried 9mm. Officer Mike Campbell's service weapon was a 9mm. We know Brett Hagison, as soon as Kenny Walker's taken into custody after the other people arrive, disappears for 4 hours. Right? Did we do any investigation as to where he went? Because it's not in the PIU report. Did he have another gun at the time? Did they explain why there's a 72-second delay between volleys of shots? According to the police themselves, they testified there was a round of shots, then there was a delay, about a minute, they said, and then there was another round of shots. We have 911 calls showing, get the police here, there's shots fired, they're shooting like crazy. That's a minute and 8 seconds until you also hear shots being fired again, and she says, they're shooting again. That's one of the people that said, get the police here. When she was interviewed, she said, nobody identified themselves as the police. Every other witness said that. And even the one they wanted to rely on, they had to interview him 3 separate times before they could get him to say that. It is.
Steve, are you expecting more to come from this federal investigation? Those answers to those questions, to those statements that you're making?
Well, I mean, I hope so, because they gave multiple false statements about this, and apparently that's what the grand jury just chose to rely on. Like we talked about, Kenny Walker was indicted in less than 2 minutes of testimony by one of the same officers who they relied on to do these interviews to exonerate him. And what she did not tell the grand jury was that a dozen neighbors had said they didn't identify themselves as police. She didn't even tell them that Kenny Walker says, I never heard him say they were the police.
So the grand jury can only react to
what they're given.
Exactly, evidence they're given. Do you think they were not presented this evidence?
Well, again, perhaps they will release it based on what Attorney General Cameron said. He probably will not want it released because it is inconsistent. The PIU report is inconsistent with what he said. But if they wanted to indict him, they would have indicted him. That's the bottom line. That is why they cherry pick whatever evidence is exculpatory. They use Mr. Sarpy's